The Texas sun was thrown a golden shine over the dusty arena, a heat that penetrated to the bones. But for Jebediah Jeb Stone, it was just an old acquaintance. At the age of 50-8, each wrinkle on his face told the story of a life dedicated to the rodeos, a tapestry of victories and losses, broken bones and broken hearts. The smell of leather, sweat, and earth was the perfume he knew as home, an aroma that transported him back to his youth, when dreams were as vast as the Texan sky. He straightened his skip hat, feeling the weight of decades of dust and memories, and spat on the floor with a family gesture. Her eyes, still sharp, traveled the crowd, seeing young and anxious faces, remembering when he was one of them, full of fire and ambition. That would be his last rodeo, a decision made not for lack of courage, but for the tiredness that accumulated in his joints. His wife, Martha, had begged him to stop, his eyes full of a concern he could no longer ignore. The grandchildren, with their eyes of admiration, deserved a grandfather who could carry them on his shoulders, not one who lived on the verge of danger every weekend. He sighed, the sound getting lost in the growing noise of the crowd. The promise that had made Martha wade in her heart. But there was a last spark to be erased, a last challenge to be faced. It was a matter of honor, a farewell to his own terms, a goodbye to the only life he had really known and loved. While heading for Breet, each step was a silent conversation with his past. He remembered the first bull that set up, a wild animal that threw him in the air like a cloth doll. The adrenaline of that moment, the mixture of fear and excitement, was what hooked him forever. He learned to read the animals, to feel his muscles contracting under him, to anticipate every sudden movement, every attempt to detach him from his powerful loin. Years of practice have transformed the fearless young man into a local legend, a whispered name with respect in bars and farms throughout the state. He was not just a cowboy. He was a piece of the living story of the rodeo, a symbol of an age that seemed to be slowly disappearing. The announcer shouted his name, and the crowd broke into applause. They were applause of recognition, of affection for a man who had given him all to that sport. Jeb felt a knot in his throat, a wave of emotion that surprised him. He waved to the audience, a contained gesture, but full of gratitude. Behind the tired smile was aware that this moment was ephemeral, one last brilliance before the twilight. He clung to the rope with his own hands, his harshly familiar leather against his skin. The outer world disappeared, leaving only him and the furious beast that awaited him across the gate, a monster of muscles and fury called Wildfire. Jeb's breath was slower, his heart beating a constant and powerful rhythm in his chest. It was silence before the storm, the calm he always sought before he surrendered to chaos. He visualized the riding in his mind, every second, every movement. 8 seconds. 8 seconds that looked like an eternity, a suspended time where only instinct and courage prevailed. He did not think of pain, risk, the possibility of a tragic ending. He thought of dance, the dangerous symphony between man and animal, a brutal harmony that few could understand. It was your art, your passion, your curse. He was ready. The gate opened with a crash, and the world exploded in a whirlwind of dust and movement. Wildfire jumped to the arena like a triggered demon, his muscles writhing in a violent effort to get rid of weight on his back. Jeb moved with the bull, an extension of the animal, his body absorbing the bumps with a fluidity born of the experience. The crowd roars, a distant and muffled sound. Time seemed to stretch and compress. 1 second, 2, 3. He was in control, feeling the rhythm of the bull, anticipating his next movement. A deadly dance under the dazzling lights of the arena. For 5, 6 seconds, Wildfire turned violently, a sudden and unpredictable movement that tested the boundaries of Jeb's resistance. He felt his body be whipped, his teeth clenched with the strength of the impact. The rope burned his hand, but he wouldn't solve her. It was a battle of wills, the stubbornness of an old cowboy against the brute force of nature. 7 seconds. Just one more. He could feel the victory, the taste of final glory. One last triumphant goodbye. He allowed himself a brief moment of pride, a flash of satisfaction because he is still able to tame the beast. But fate that day had other plans. On the threshold of the 8th second, Wildfire gave one last and desperate bump, a movement of pure malice. Jeb was launched in the air, his body flying without control before falling heavily on the hard earth. The collective sound of amazement of the crowd was the last thing he heard before the darkness. The bull, not satisfied, turned and invested against the inert form on the floor. The rodeo clowns ran to distract the animal, but it was too late. The Wildfire horn found his target, a brutal blow that sealed the fate of that last rodeo. The dust settled slowly, revealing a scene of silence and shock. Jebediah Stone lay property in the center of the arena, the fallen hero, the last chapter of his long story written with the red paint of the sacrifice. The previously noisy and exultant crowd was now in reverent and dark silence. The Texas sun continued to shine, indifferent to the human drama that had just unfolded. For the old Clover, the dance was over. The silence that followed was not of defeat, but the end of an era, the goodbye of a legend that had set up his last bull. Wildfire was not a common bull. He was a force of nature, a legend in himself. Born and raised in the wild pastures of western Texas, he carried in his blood the inheritance of an indomitable animal lineage. His eyes were like coal on grill, burning with primitive intelligence and deep aversion to any form of subjugation. Its hair was dark red, almost the color of dry blood, and its muscles wavered under the skin like living hills. Each rodeo creator who saw him knew he was facing something special, an animal that had not been born to be tamed, but to challenge his own notion of dominion. He was known throughout the rodeo circuit for his unpredictability and his explosive force. Many cowboys, young and veterans, had tried their luck in their loin, and all had found the same fate, the dust of the arena. Wildfire not only dropped his knights. He seemed to do this with a calculated contempt, a wild pride in his unbeaten ability. There was a malice in his movements, a power dance that aimed not only to unbalance but humiliate. He became the final test for anyone who considered himself a true cowboy, the monster at the end of the hero's journey. Taurus owners, the McCoy brothers, treated him with a mixture of respect and caution. They understood that they had no Wildfire. They were merely their guardians. They fed him with the best grain, guaranteed that his pastures were vast and open, but never approached without a resistant fence between them. They saw fury in their eyes every day, a flame that never diminished. They knew that within that massive body inhabited a spirit that would never bow, an iron will that would prefer death to surrender. And it was the same fury that made him a star in the arena. On the day of Jebediah Stone's last rodeo, Wildfire seemed more agitated than usual. He patered the floor of his surrounding, snorting clouds of dust, his eyes fixed in nothing and everything at the same time. Perhaps he would feel the tension in the air, the electricity of the crowd, or perhaps it was something deeper, an animal foreboding about the confrontation that was coming. He did not know Jeb as a man, but perhaps recognized in him a similar spirit, a stubbornness that mirrored his. It was an inevitable confrontation between two forces of nature, two kings in their own domains, designed to collide. When the Brett gate opened, the contained fury of Wildfire exploded. He did not jump only. He erupted in the arena, a physical manifestation of anger and power. The weight of the cowboy on his back was an affront, a violation of his sovereignty. Every jump, every turn, was an attempt to purge this strange presence. He felt the resistance of man, the way he moved in sync, and that only fueled his anger. It was not just an instinct to get rid of a weight. It became a personal battle, a struggle for domination that he was determined to win. The seconds dragged on, and the bull's frustration grew. The man was still there, clinging with a tenacity that Wildfire rarely found. He could feel the bailout breath, the squeeze of his legs, and that was angry. He dived and turned, using all the tricks he knew, all the movements that had defeated so many others before. The crowd roared, but the sound was just a background noise to the fury symphony that touched his head. He was blinded by anger, focused on one goal, the annihilation of his opponent. And then he felt a change, a slight imbalance, a second fraction of vulnerability. With one last and colossal effort, he propelled himself to the sky, twisting his body in a vicious bow. He felt the weight disappear, the sudden liberation. The man was in the air. The victory was yours. But the fury had not dissipated. Seeing the form lying on the floor was not enough. Instinct, primitive anger took control. The threat was still there in its arena, in its territory. He turned, lowered his head and attacked. The impact was a tremor that traveled his body. He did not feel remorse, only the raw satisfaction of eliminating the challenge. The rodeo clowns, with their colorful clothes and their barrels, were mere distractions, flies to be amazed. He pushed them away with disdain, his attention still fixed in the immovable figure. He snorted, the red dust mixing with the smell of blood in the air. He had tasted his point. He was the king of that arena, and no one, not even the legend called Jebediah Stone, could challenge his reign. He was indomitable. Slowly, as caregivers guided him out of the arena with his long sticks, the red mist of anger began to dissipate. He was still tense, his muscles shaking with residual adrenaline. Back in his fence, he was alone, the sound of the crowd now a distant murmur. He looked at the horizon, to Texas's west sun, and let out a long, deep mute. It was not a sound of triumph, but something more complex, an echo of savagery that defined its existence. He had won the battle, but the war within it, the indomitable fury, would continue to burn forever. The moment when the wildfire horn hit Jebediah was like a silent thunder. The brutal and explicit image froze in time, recorded in the mind of each viewer. The deafening roar of the crowd died instantly, replaced by heavy and suffocating silence. It was a silence that contained 1,000 unclean screams, a sound vacuum filled with shock, horror, and a collective sadness. The air, once electric with the rodeo excitement, was now dense and immovable, heavy with the tragedy that had just unfolded. The Texas sun seemed to have lost some of its brightness, its light falling over a scene of desolation. The rodeo clowns, whose function was to protect the fallen cowboy, acted with desperate quickness, their faces painted with smiles grotesquely with panic in their eyes. They have managed to ward off the furious bull, their movements now no longer for entertainment, but for a dark need. The arena, which moments earlier was a stage of courage and spectacle, became a sanctuary of pain. The paramedics ran to the center, their boots lifting small clouds of dust with each hurry. They knelt alongside Jeb, a small group of hope in a sea of despair. In the stands, Martha Stone felt the world collapse. The scream she choked in her throat was a sharp knife on her chest. His fingers clung to the grid in front of him, his white joints. She saw everything on a slow, torturous camera. Jeb's flight, the fall, the merciless attack of the bull. Every second was an eternity of agony. His sons and grandchildren by his side tried to comfort her, but their own faces were pale and marked by the shock. The silence of the arena was a reflection of the silence that had settled in his heart, a void where there was once love and worry. The broken promise echoed in his mind. No one moved. No one spoke. The viewers remained in their places, as if they were trapped by an invisible force. Rude, Cowboy, and farmers who lived surrounded by the hardness of life took their hats in a gesture of respect and reverence. Women wiped silent tears, their faces a mask of compassion. The children, confused, looked at their parents in search of an explanation that would not come. The arena, usually a place of celebration of life and courage, has become an open-air funeral, joined by a pain shared by the fall of a hero. The speaker, whose voice had guided the emotion of the crowd all day, was silent. He was looking at the scene below, his forgotten microphone in his hand. There were no words that could capture the magnitude of what had happened. Any attempt to narrate, to explain, would be a desecration of that sacred moment of silence. He, like everyone else, was just an powerless witness of cruel destiny. The rodeo script had been torn, and what was left was the raw and relentless reality of life and death. The work of the paramedics was methodical and urgent, but to the crowd that watched, seemed desperately slow. Each movement, every piece of equipment that was brought was examined with fragile hope. They saw the cervical necklace being placed, the stretcher being prepared. The silence was so deep that Velcro's sound being arrested and the professional whispers of doctors seemed abnormally high. The intimacy of a man's suffering was being exposed for thousands of people to see, and the weight of this exhibition was palpable. The rodeo community, so united in joy, was now united in a silent vigil. When they finally raised the stretcher, a collective sigh traveled the crowd. It was a sound of pain, of fear, of a small trembling calling hope. The journey of the arena maca to the ambulance that expected seemed to take a lifetime. Each step of the paramedics was followed by thousands of pairs of eyes. No one dared to applaud, for there was nothing to be celebrated. It was a solemn procession, a silent withdrawal from a warrior fallen from the battlefield. The red arena dust, spotted with blood, was the only witness that would remain. The ambulance departed, its lights flashing, but the siren remained off, as if not disturbing the sacred silence that had taken over the place. The crowd began to scatter slowly in small silent groups. The conversations were whispered, the dark faces. The rodeo was over, but the memory of that day would remain forever. The deafening silence of the arena was not just the absence of sound. It was the overwhelming presence of mortality, a reminder that even the largest legends can fall, leaving behind a void that no word can fill. The sun finally put it on the horizon, painting the Texan sky with orange and purple tones. The empty arena was plunged into shadows, the rested dust, the silence now just the stillness of the night. But for those who were there, the echo of that deafening silence would continue to resonate in their minds and hearts. It was the sound of the end of an era, the sound of a cowboy giving his last goodbye, not with a nod, but with the final sacrifice in the name of the passion that defined his life. The hospital bedroom was sterile and white, a stark contrast to the dust and color of the world of Jeb. The only sound was the rhythmic and constant beep of the monitors, a mechanical soundtrack for the Stone family vigil. Jebediah lay in bed, her broken and bandaged body, a shadow of the vibrant man who had entered the arena. He was unconscious, lost somewhere between life and death, while the machines around him waged the battle for him. Martha never left his side, his hand holding his, an anchor in the stormy sea of uncertainty. She spent her hours talking to him, her voice a soft whisper in the silence of the room. He told him stories of his past together, the day they met at a county fair, their first clumsy meeting, the birth of their children. She reminded him of his victories, not just in rodeos, but in life. The farm they built out of nowhere, the crops they surpassed, the storms that faced side by side. They were memories designed to call him back, remind him that there was much more for fighting than just 8 seconds on a bull. The children and grandchildren came in shifts, bringing designs, flowers, and the warmth of the family. His eldest son, a man who had chosen the safety of an office instead of the farm's unpredictability, sat next to the bed, his eyes full of silent regret. He never completely understood his father's passion, the attraction to danger. Now, seeing his childhood hero so vulnerable, he felt a wave of admiration and sadness. He made a silent promise to himself. If his father survived, he would spend more time listening, trying to understand the heart of the cowboy that created him. Jeb's younger granddaughter, a 6-year-old girl named Daisy, did not understand the severity of the situation. For her, Grandpa was just sleeping for a long time. She climbed into the chair by the bed and whispered in her ear, telling her about her pony and the blue ribbon she won at the school fair. She placed a small wild flower that reaped on the way to the hospital in her immovable hand. "Wake up soon, Grandpa," she whispered. "I promised you would teach me how to really lock." It was a promise of innocence, a headlight of hope in the darkness of the hospital room. The doctors came and went, their cautiously optimistic expressions. The bones were broken, the injured internal organs, but Jeb's spirit of struggle, they said, was strong. He was in an induced coma to allow his body to heal, but his vital signs were stabilizing. Each little improvement was celebrated by the family as a great victory. Martha clung to every word, every chart on the monitor, looking for signs that her Jeb was coming back to her. The promise he had made, that would be his last rodeo, now had a tragic and ironic weight. The nights were the longest for Martha. Alone with her thoughts and the constant sound of the machines, she revisited every moment she led to the tragedy. She was blamed for not being firmer, for allowing him to say goodbye to his own terms. But deep down she knew she couldn't stop Jeb. The rodeo was part of who he was, as essential as the air he breathed. His love for him was a love for all that he represented: courage, stubbornness, and a free spirit that could not be caged. Amid pain, memories became a balm. She remembered Jeb teaching her children to ride, her infinite patience, her proud smile. He remembered the nights when they danced on the porch under the stars, to the sound of an old country song on the radio. These were the memories that mattered, the tapestry of a well-lived life, full of love and laughter. And it was in these memories that she found the strength to continue waiting, to continue believing. She made her own promise at the foot of the bed, that they would have more dances, more laughs, more memories to create. Then, on a quiet afternoon, while Martha read one of her favorite books aloud, she felt a light squeeze in her hand. Her eyes widened, her heart leaned. She looked at Jeb's face and saw her eyelashes shivery. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. They were turf and confused, but they were open. He looked at her, and a glint of recognition shone in his depths. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse sound escaped. Martha cried, tears of relief and joy running down her face. "You came back," she whispered, squeezing his hand harder. "You came back to me." Jeb blinked slowly, a single tear running down the corner of his eye. He still had a long way ahead, a path of pain and rehabilitation. But at that moment, in the silence of the hospital room, a new promise was born. The promise of a new beginning, of a second chance. The cowboy had been broken, but his spirit, fed by the love of his family and the memories of a lifetime, refused to be defeated. Jebediah Stone's recovery was slow and arduous, a mountain that he had to scale one painful step at a time. Physiotherapy was its new arena, and the therapists their new opponents. Each movement was a battle against pain and stiffness, a constant reminder of its meeting with wildfire. There were days when frustration consumed him, when he wanted to give up and surrender to immobility. But then he looked at Martha's face, to the drawings of his grandchildren glued to the wall, and found the strength to continue. He was no longer fighting for 8 seconds of glory. He was fighting for a lifetime of precious moments. The news of his survival and his struggle spread through the rodeo community. Letters and cards arrived from all over the country, cowboy he knew, and fans he had never found. They shared stories of how Jeb had inspired them, their courage, their resilience. He inadvertently became a different type of legend. No more the man who could tame any bull, but the man who could not be broken. His legacy was being rewritten, not in the dust of the arena, but in the hearts of the people he had touched. Over time, he began to heal. First, it was the small steps with a walker, then the crutches, and finally, the day he managed to walk alone through the hospital corridor. Each milestone was a victory celebrated by his family. He would never ride a bull, would never feel the adrenaline of the arena again, but found that there was a different force in relearning to walk, being able to hug his wife, to be able to hold his granddaughter's hand. It was a quieter, deeper but no less significant force. When he finally returned home, the farm never looked so beautiful. The smell of the earth, the sound of cattle, the vast sky of Texas, everything seemed new and precious. He spent his days on the porch, observing his life unfolding around him. His son, faithful to his silent promise, began to visit more often, not out of obligation, but for a genuine desire to connect. They talked for hours about cattle, about time, about life. Jeb shared his wisdom, not just about rodeos, but about perseverance, about finding beauty in simplicity. He found a new purpose. Young cowboys, aspiring champions, began to look for him. They came in search of advice, techniques, but found much more. Jeb became a mentor, a teacher. He did not teach just how to set up. He taught about the heart of a cowboy. He talked about respect for the animal, about the importance of humility in victory and grace in defeat. He talked about life outside the arena, family, about legacy. He was shaping the next generation, not in his image, but with the wisdom his journey had given him. His relationship with Martha flourished in a way that he never imagined being possible. Free from the constant shadow of the danger of the rodeo, they rediscovered the simple joy of each other's company. They made long walks of the property, or as long as Jeb's body allowed, took care of the garden together and spent the nights on the porch, just as she had dreamed. Their love, tested by fire, had become stronger, deeper, forged in adversity and seasoned by gratitude. Daisy, her granddaughter, became her shadow. He fulfilled his promise and taught her to lock. Sitting in his chair on the porch, he guided her with his calm and patient voice, his eyes shining with pride with every successful loop. He was spending his knowledge, his passion, in a different way. It was no longer about proving your own courage, but of nourishing courage in others. He saw in his eyes the same spark he has ever had, and made sure that she understood that true strength was not in mastering others, but in mastering himself. Jebediah Stone's legacy would not be the number of champion buckles he won, or the legendary bulls he set up. His true legacy was in the resilience of the human spirit, in the strength found in the love of the family, in the past wisdom from one generation to another. He was a living reminder that life's greatest victories are often won away from the crowd's eyes in the silent battles of the heart. He was a cowboy to the end, but his heart had found a much larger and more rewarding arena. Years later, when they told the history of Cowboy that was attacked by a bull in Texas, people not only spoke of the tragedy, they talked about what happened next. They spoke of the man who fell, but refused to stay on the floor. They spoke of the legacy of a heart of Cowboy, a heart that was broken and patched, but in the end, it became stronger and more true. The arena dust had ceded, but Jebediah Stone's spirit continued to ride, not in a furious bull, but in the hearts of all he inspired. 5 years passed. Life on Stone Farm had settled at a quiet and rewarding pace. Jebediah, now in her early 60s, walked with a cane and permanent blunder, but her eyes still carried the spark of a cowboy. He had accepted his new life, finding a contentment in being a mentor, a husband, and a grandfather. The rodeo arena was a distant memory, a part of his story he had kept. He had never stepped in one, glad to hear the stories of the cowboy young people who visited him. One day a letter arrived. It was an official invitation of the county annual rodeo committee. They were planning a special ceremony to honor their career and incredible recovery. They wanted him to be the guest of honor, to enter the arena once more, not as a competitor, but as an icon. The idea filled him with a mixture of pride and trepidation. Returning to that place, the scene of his greatest triumph and his almost death, was a frightening perspective. Martha saw the hesitation in her eyes, the silent war waged in her mind. She put her hand over his. "You don't have to do that, Jeb," she said softly. "You have nothing to prove." He knew she was right. He had nothing to prove to anyone. But there was a part of it, the part that would never stop being a cowboy, which felt the attraction of red dust. It was not about glory or ego. It was about ending a chapter in his own terms, differently from what he had planned years ago. It was about facing the ghosts of the past and showing themselves that they had no more power over him. "I think I need it," he finally answered, his firm voice. "I need to do it for me." He also wanted to do this for all the other cowboys, to show that there is life after the fall, that a man's identity is not defined by a single moment, as traumatic as it may be. Martha, seeing the determination in her eyes, the same determination she knew so well, simply nodded. She would be by her side as she always was. The whole family decided to go, to support him, to witness this circle closing. The day of the rodeo arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Jebediah Stone's name was on all lips. People were not just there to see the bulls and cowboys. They were there to see a legend to return. When the time has come, the speaker, the same 5 years earlier, spoke with a voice full of emotion. He told the story of Jeb, his career, his accident, and his miraculous recovery. The crowd listened in respectful silence. Many of them have witnessed the traumatic event firsthand. Then the gate opened, not the bull of a bull, but the great main gate. Jebediah Stone entered the arena. He was not on horseback, but on foot, backed by his cane with Martha beside him. He walked slowly, every deliberate step towards the center of the arena. The crowd, seeing him, rose in unison and broke out in a foot ovation that shook the stands. They were not applause of excitement, but of deep respect, admiration, and love. Tears sprang into Jeb's eyes as he absorbed the wave of emotion. He stopped in the center of the arena, where he had fallen. He looked at the red earth under his feet, then to the crowded stands, to the Texas sky. He felt no fear, no sadness. He felt a deep peace, a sense of closure. He took the microphone offered him. Her hand trembled a little, but her voice was clear and strong. He thanked everyone for his support, for his prayers, for not forgetting him. He talked about the hardness of the sport, but also about the beauty, camaraderie, and spirit he embodies. A man can be overthrown from a bull, he said, his voice echoing through the arena. Your body can be broken, but the heart of a cowboy's heart can never be defeated, as long as he has faith and family by his side. The crowd roared in approval. He then turned and looked at Martha, his eyes saying everything the words could not. He had made up with his past. The arena was no longer a place of trauma. It was a place of redemption. As part of the tribute, they brought a bull to the arena. It was not a rodeo animal, but an old bull of long horns, a symbol of the West. And then, to everyone's surprise, the speaker announced the name of the bull that would be retired that night: Wildfire. The old bull, now with his age weighing on him, entered the arena. His fury had diminished, replaced by a tired majesty. He and Jeb looked through the arena, two old warriors who had shared a moment that changed their lives. There was a silent understanding, a mutual respect between man and the beast. Jebediah Stone left the arena that day not as a broken hero, but as a complete man. He had faced his past, honored his legacy, and found a peace that money could not buy. His return to red dust was not about reliving glory, but about redefining what he meant to be a winner. And in doing so, he gave everyone in the arena, and himself, the most unbelievable ending of all. An end not of tragedy, but of triumph of the human spirit. The lights of the stadium shone as a veteran cowboy was preparing for his last mount, the air crackling at the promise of danger and glory. But no one could predict the shocking turnaround that would turn this rodeo into a legend. When Texas's most feared bull refused to be tamed, he triggered a chain of events that would test the limits of human resistance, family love, and what a hero's legacy really means. What happened after the dust has lowered is a story of inquestable party and spirits, an unbelievable journey of the death threshold of the arena that almost took everything.